That has proved to be both an interesting point for many One Piece fans, as well as repeating many of the beats that we knew were going to be important. But there is one aspect of it that many people have not seen as prevalent as maybe we would have liked, and that is the fact that the Straw Hats were supposed to be getting some upgrades during this arc. And actually, there may actually be a way that they could manifest the upgrades that we have long speculated that they needed and wanted. But how they're going to get these upgrades might very well be far different than what we had anticipated. So let's go ahead and break how they're going to get them and why a lot of people thought they were going to get them in the first place. One Piece is ending, and we've known that for quite a while now. Oda has called this the final saga. Now, how long is the final saga going to be? It could be a while. Technically, in comparison, this would be something more like Marineford. Yeah, technically there is one Marineford, but there's actually a bunch of other little story arcs that build up to it that help expand the running length. And on that same note, in talking about repeating processes, a lot of Elbaf feels very similar to Sabaody Archipelago, with the nature of what we thought was fully assembled Straw Hat crew coming up against enemies that are way more powerful than them and having a stark realization of where they need to be in order to complete their goal. So all of that sounds like it's pretty far on track so far, and honestly, we're even on track with the fact that in this latest chapter, Scopergaban has basically entered the picture to save the Straw Hats from themselves and from the enemy. Now, maybe it's just subjective point of view, but when this initially happened in the last chapter, I do have to admit it was a bit disappointing. Not because I inherently hate the idea of it, but because I do have to admit that I thought Elbaf was going to be a lot more about pushing the Straw Hats, and I'm not sure with how quickly this resolved we're going to get that result. But just because something was quick doesn't mean it won't have a lasting impact. The real purpose of this was to showcase that Scopergaban basically has the Haki that can damage Celestial Knights and presumably the Gorosei. And while I think that's fine, I mean, I don't sure how well the audience is going to take having a brand new set of Haki considering how late into the game we are, but that's a separate issue. Bigger issue is that really, let's be honest, this is not going to affect any of the Straw Hats that were supposed to be getting upgrades here. That is an upgrade that is going to be given to Luffy, Sanji, and Zoro. It is not an upgrade that is going to be given to any of the other Straw Hats. Heck, most of them can't even use Haki, so why would they be able to use this new special type that can damage the God Knight? The other side of that is, I would have said this would have been a setup for them to basically start wanting to either learn Haki or expand their Devil Fruit or expand their other abilities. The problem is that because One Piece doesn't work like a lot of our anime universes, nothing is done quickly in this universe. There's no cheats and shortcuts usually. It took Luffy, Sanji, and Zoro 2 years to master the Haki that they have, and then continue to expand it for roughly about 6 months. So tying back to my disappointment with the appearance of the God Knights and then their kind of sudden defeat here, at least in part of Summers, I knew Robin wasn't going to necessarily suddenly develop armament Haki, but I do have to admit, I don't know if this setup is leaving enough room for the Straw Hats to grow, and I was forced to wrestle with this because I can't quite picture going into the end of the series with, frankly, 7/10 of the crew not being useful. I mean, yes, everybody has their role, but let's be honest, outside of Chopper, who's medical, and Jinbei, who's the helmsman, most of those characters are going to be expected to be fighting, and especially Jinbei during a ground combat. So when you really think about it that way, these Straw Hats need an upgrade, and I'm still wondering how we're going to fit that into the schedule. It's certainly possible, we still have the hints for it, but we lack the overall purview for them to do that. Or do we? Because there is a character who might very well be able to facilitate everything that we need, most importantly, put time on our side. That character is Jewelry Bonnie. Now, to break this down, and the important part of it is understanding how Bonnie's ability works. Now, Bonnie's ability affects time on objects. Asterisk here, object seems to be anything she can place her hand on. It can be anything from an egg, to a person, to herself, to just about anything she needs. So basically, she needs to warp a door to being, rusted away, that can happen. Turn eggs into birds, that can happen. So on and so forth. And she can even affect potential futures, being able to change herself into various forms and so on. The other caveat here is that these changes are almost always temporary. Kind of one of the important restrictions of her power. But what if they weren't? What if the absolute end of her power is being able to affect time and not have it change back? So hear me out on this, and here's the important aspect. There's one distinction that makes Bonnie's power different from something like the ripe fruit, which was used to give Momonosuke an adult body. That is that there is a big deal made about the fact that Momonosuke will still have the mind he has as a child with the adult body, meaning he doesn't get any of the privilege of growing up for 20 years. That is never stated with Bonnie's power. It is in fact implied that with Bonnie's power, you take on the mental capacity of the thing that you become. So for example, when she turns Marines into babies, they take on the effects of babies. When she turns them into old men that don't know where they are, that same thing happens. So if she were to take and say apply 2 years worth of time to somebody like say Robin so she could learn armament Haki, technically Robin should have the experience of 2 years of learning armament Haki. Now apply this to the rest of the Straw Hats. Now I do think that this is actually the way that it'll work, but I do think there's two different ways it could manifest. One is that Bonnie could do this simply by touch, tapping each of the Straw Hats into their potential future that would give them the best bet focusing on a specific item, as I don't think she'd be able to give the wide variety that she has access to. Like if a character says they're going to sit down and say for Frankie upgrade all of his technology, then hypothetically on that current path she should be able to hurl them towards that and develop that ability. The other is that as a Paramecia type, she might very well be able to affect the environment, as in create a time bubble that might very well keep time moving inside but slow it outside. This could also effectively be used to buy time for all the Straw Hats without having to do them individually, and this means that we could end up with the Straw Hats getting the power upgrades that they need without affecting the flow of the rest of the One Piece world.